Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this week's installment of TeamOhana's webinar series. Today, we are talking about board ready headcount. What does the board care about when it comes to your headcount plan, and how can you be prepared with anything that they might want to know? I don't have our usual slides to go through before we get into our demo today because I am joined today by a special guest. So I'll have Aaron introduce himself in just a moment. But just to give you some background on Aaron, he was actually one of Team Ohana's first customers back in the day. Aaron has worked in FP&A for a long time. So he's very experienced with managing a headcount plan, working with HR and talent and business leaders to keep track of all the employees at his company. And also very familiar with board reporting. So he was a Team Ohana fan before he became a member of Team Ohana, and he now leads our finance team. So still involved with board reporting and headcount management today. So Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything you wanted to add on your introduction there?
One, thanks for the intro. I will also add that in addition to just being a Team Ohana fan, we were the first customers of Team Ohana way back in the day. So I felt the pain. One of the first roles that was tasked to me and my prior company was managing a hiring plan. It was in a spreadsheet. It was relatively easy. About a quarter in, we hit hypergrowth mode, and five roles on a spreadsheet equals five lines immediately became 100 plus, and things got out of control quickly. And so we looked for a solution. We landed on Team Ohana, and we never really looked back.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so we're going to dive into that a lot more today. Just some housekeeping, and in terms of the agenda, we're going to go through a Q&A with Aaron. So I have a few questions to ask him, and then we're going to go through a demo of Team Ohana and kind of talk about how Aaron used the tool, and I'll lead the demo there. But for those of you who are joining us today, feel free to drop any questions you have for us in the chat. And I'll try to pick them up as we go. So yeah, Aaron is as a Team Ohana expert, and he's been in your shoes as a user as well. So feel free to make use of this time. And Last thing here, be sure to check out the resources tab. We have a really exciting webinar coming up next week as well, talking about Team Ohana, the new Team Ohana computer, which is it's going to blow your mind. I love it. I've been using it a lot lately to customize views, and we might even have a sneak peek at the end of today's demo. All right. So with that, yeah, Aaron, let's jump into it. So we're talking about board ready headcount plans today. So can we just start by quickly establishing why does the board care about headcount, and what do they really want to see when it comes to a company's headcount plan?
Yeah, I mean, why do they want to see it? At the end of the day, the people at a company are really what move the mission, the vision, the trajectory of the company forward. The people are what build things. It is your biggest, I guess, resource allocation of capital. So it's really just an indication of where are you investing, like what specific areas are you investing from go to market to product to engineering. So it gives the board an understanding of one, kind of how many people you have and where your investments today, and then it indicates to them where you're targeting the investments for the future. So that's really why just looking at even at a very high level, number of headcount can tell a true story because a board member can kind of infer based off of kind of the allocation of number of heads where that investment is going. So it's really just telling the high level story of, I guess, where we're investing and what direction you're going with the company.
Okay, got it. Thanks. And yeah, you mentioned number of heads, and when you say investing, and I think people think about finance, we think about dollars too. Did you look at both? Do you look at both? Yeah, how does that shake out between heads and dollars?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about it in the context of I guess, preparing for a board meeting and what you want to share with the board, I don't necessarily think you need to go all the way down to that level of, compensation dollars and then breaking it out by salaries, taxes, benefits. Like that, I would say is more of a double click for kind of the analysts and maybe the directors to have like back pocket ready for in case there's questions from the board. But really at a high level, it's understanding and telling the story to the board of, hey, we started the year or the period with this many headcount on board by function. We added this many new roles, this many people left. So where are we at today? We're having this board meeting today. How many people do we have and by what function? And then they want to see the remaining people that we plan to hire across the board, again by function, typically kind of like go to market, maybe broken out sales and marketing, maybe customer success, and then in the R&D org, engineering product that's split, and then of course G&A, finance. We live in G&A. We're small but mighty teams. So you want to understand where the remaining people are going to be hired, and then what that means at the end of the year, the period, I guess whatever you're tracking.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Um, and then I know you mentioned earlier that in your past experience, you were managing things fine on a spreadsheet, and then you hit that period of hypergrowth and things got more chaotic to manage. Can you just give like a few examples of what made it so difficult to track or where that process broke down?
Yeah, I mean it happened more than once, many times that I can remember. I mean, it probably happened almost every single board meeting before we really had a solution in place where I would prepare the headcount slide and pull it together and put it in the slide deck, and then the head of people would leave a comment and say, "Hey, I have a different current headcount number," and then we'd spin wheels on pulling down data from the HRIS, the ATS, the financial system. We do our reconciliations together and we still get to a different number, but we would both be able to explain our numbers. Um, it was essentially because, lots of different things can drive this noise. For example, we were showing committed headcount, for example, people on board today, plus people who had accepted offers, so future starts and anyone who's planning to start in the future. Whereas, the head of people was saying these are just the people in seat today. So that was one gap. Another gap was because we were looking at different employee types. For example, in the finance number that we were sharing, it essentially included everyone except for kind of interns, contractors, temporary workers. So pretty much anyone who could generate an FTE equivalent of. Um, versus the people team was saying, you know what, we're only looking at full time. We have excluded part time and part time leave of absences, paid, unpaid. You get into all those little details. It creates all this noise. So we realized that we didn't really have this source of truth of where to, I guess, find the holy grail number of how many people we have today. And so that was definitely a recurring pain point that we ran into.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, and those are actually, I think, really good examples that I want to just highlight and underscore because I get questions today about like vibe coding and the like what is the true value of TeamOhana, and those exact examples are perfect because it's, the question of like how many headcount do I have open sounds like a very simple and straightforward question, but that means very different things to very different people. Even that happened earlier when you say we're wanting to understand how we're investing in heads. And I thought we show them the dollars that we're spending in each division, but you said no, it's actually better to understand the number of heads in each division. And obviously, there's like variation in compensation, so it's more telling to look at the number of heads. And that happens a lot when you have different sources of truth. You have a different definition of what an employee is in your HRIS versus what's in your ATS. And then you have maybe even other systems that are tracking things like contractors. So, yeah, that's what we talk a lot with our customers about how the underlying data model of TeamOhana, having that structure where you think of all the different ways that you might categorize and look at headcount from employee type to whether or not they're a backfill for an existing employee or split backfills. And yeah, all of those things. It's actually, you realize it's a much harder question to answer than you initially thought, just to say like, what is our headcount? And that's just the first question, right? And then it goes in from there, why, how, what. Cool. Um, okay, yeah, so we just covered kind of what those challenges are. Obviously, we know then you implemented Team Ohana. And can you tell us a little bit more about like what the process was that you built and how you used Team Ohana to help solve some of those challenges you were having?
Yeah, I mean, the immediate, I guess, challenge was just that there was no source of truth for, our entire workforce. So existing people plus open roles, whether they're in progress, not started, you name it. Um, so the first step was just to getting to that source of truth because there are multiple systems in play here. The recruiting team works out of an ATS, the people team works out of an HRIS, the finance team works either in spreadsheets or in an FP&A platform or both. And without one system connecting at all, it essentially lived in a finance owned master spreadsheet that was pulling essentially manually downloading from all these various sources. And so really that first step was just locking in one kind of circle of source of truth where, finance put the hiring plan within TeamOhana and it lived there. It gave everyone visibility. So there were no more questions of how many roles do I have to be hired. Managers didn't have to ask. It connected with the ATS. There was no, before TeamOhana, sometimes you'd have the head of recruiting would leave a comment in a spreadsheet or there'd be a Slack message. I would go in and manually change the status in my spreadsheet to in progress. So now no more doing that. Once someone is hired or throughout the hiring process, the status is updated automatically. It's offer is out. Offer is submitted, offer out, all those various movements. And then once someone's hired, the sync from the ATS to the HRIS, that was always there. That was really the only connection that happened before. But then this final reconciliation of mapping this hired person against the role that we had budgeted for them, that all happened in one, I guess, one automation. And so there was no more downloading for various data sources, reconciling, just doing from a budget variance analysis and then figuring out how many people we have today, committed hires. It essentially solved for all of that. And then we had immediate access and real-time reporting. You can probably find there's some story I think on our website about how Aaron got his Fridays back. There used to be a report that I pulled together for the head of recruiting that would share with the executive team with is literally just how many people do we have today, how many open roles. It took me anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. Team Ohana just removed all of that, and I just pointed them to that. There's a quick view in Team Ohana that had that. So I essentially got my Fridays back from implementing Team Ohana.
That's awesome. What did you end up doing with your Fridays once you got them back?
Of course, more strategic work.
I always like to say once you free up your time on the manual work that you're doing, now you can go back into Team Ohana or for you maybe the FP&A tool that Team Ohana was feeding and actually analyze the data now that you have it in like that normalized source of truth.
Yeah, I mean, totally. It's instead of I guess reconciling numbers and making sure that they're correct. It's asking the questions of, okay, if we hired this many people, or we're behind on hiring, or this function was ahead but this one's behind, then it begs the question of why is that, and what were the decisions made that I guess led to that business activity. So yes, it opens up the time to actually ask the important questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, yeah, that leads to my last question here before we jump into the demo is what are some of those like follow-up questions? If we think again about board reporting, like you start just by saying, here's what we showed you last time, here's what's changed since then and why. Yeah, can you talk through like what some follow-up questions that you might have to prepare your CFO for in a board meeting?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the some of I guess the questions that come up are, are we ahead or behind on hiring, and why? And then where are we focusing hiring, and has that changed since, the last time we met? And so, those are the questions that likely get answered, and the potential, well, those are the questions. The potential answers can be, for example, maybe we had initially started the year saying, we really want to build out this new product feature. We need to double down on engineering and product hiring. We decided later, we realized, halfway through the quarter, one of our existing products is doing really well, and we really need to just ramp up sales capacity because we're seeing that huge ROI. So essentially, what that translates into is, hey, maybe we need to pause or defer some of these lower priority R&D roles, and we want to double down and accelerate on go-to-market hiring. So essentially what that means is we might be behind on R&D hiring versus where we had initially planned at the beginning of the year, but we're actually accelerating go-to-market hiring. And so the reason for that is, hey, we've made a business decision of we see value in our existing product and more value than what we can assume or achieve in the near term from this new product feature. So we've essentially reallocated that investment.
Got it. I'm curious that type of example, is that something that you know going in like, well, I know we made that strategy decision, so I'm expecting the numbers to line up, or how often are you going in and looking at the numbers and saying, "Hey, that's unexpected," and then you have to go figure out what happened?
It's definitely a mix of both. I
Mhm.
mean, it's never, it's never the same answer to all the questions.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just might be a little bit behind on hiring. Sometimes you might hire people faster. Um, it does these kind of, questions sometimes warrant some conversations with people involved. Um, sometimes there was a decision made. Sometimes, for example, maybe we were lower staffed on recruiting capacity and we just couldn't hit those targets.
Mhm.
So it's just really understanding, like, it's having conversations with people, but the only way to have the conversations with the people is to have this information in front of you and readily accessible. And so having this, I guess, real time allows me to go back to the recruiting team, back to the hiring managers, the senior leaders, and say, hey, if I don't know the answer, I'd say, hey, did you know that we are, 10% behind hiring here? Is there a reason for that? And if there's no reason for that, okay, what can we do to accelerate? So there's not always one process, but you typically start with the data that you trust, and then you come with some educated questions to ask the people that are part of the process.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. There's always like a deeper level that you can dig into. And just to tease the TeamOhana computer again, one of my favorite parts about it is that it can read across comments and justifications in TeamOhana. So if people are documenting like what decision they're making at what time, you can kind of start to get that like um AI summary of all the different themes of comments and what happened rather than having to like go back after the fact and figure out like this happened in a conversation. But yeah, let's jump into the demo now. Thanks, Erin, for answering all my questions. And just a call out to those on the webinar. Aaron's going to stick around. He's going to chime in on the demo as well. So feel free at any point to drop a question in the chat, and we're happy to take your questions as well. But for now, I will share my screen and we can take a look at how Aaron was doing this in Team Ohana. All right. So whenever we're talking about what finance needs to see in Team Ohana, we always start with the headcount ledger here. Because really, this is that single source of truth that Aaron was describing. His live view, where you can see where you started from your headcount at the beginning of the year, where you're currently at, so who your butt in seat heads are. And this is all being fed live from your HRIS. And then you can see where you're planning to go to the end of the year. So this is looking at your forecasted headcount. And the forecast is taking into account not only your current headcount, but also any future terminations, as well as your to be hireds. So these are all of your open and approved headcount. So this is exactly what Aaron was describing as sort of the baseline for what the board wants to see. Where are we at currently, and where are we going? And then why this is so easy for Team Ohana to pull together is really what's happening behind the scenes. It's all of the data that's being fed into Team Ohana that we can give this one fully reconciled view. So pulling in as soon as an offer is sent in your ATS, and then it's accepted, marking that candidate as hired, and then completing that reconciliation when the employee gets set up in the HRIS. Tracking things like transfers, employees moving across the business, and where backfills need to be done. Of course, keeping track of terminations and again, making sure that folks are actually making their backfill decisions. Are we backfilling people one to one with a new approved headcount here? Are we marking them as not eligible for backfill, or are we splitting the role into multiple roles? These are all little details of how a headcount plan can uh, how a forecast can um, quickly lose touch with reality. If we have a lot of people who are leaving the business and we're not backfilling in time, then we're not going to get an accurate view of what our forecasted headcount are. And then finally here are to be hireds or TBHs. This is really where Team Ohana specializes in tracking the ins and the outs of what can happen um, to a hiring plan throughout the year. So yeah, as changes need to happen, as backfills are created and need to be approved, roles are up leveled or moved around or pushed out. All of that can be tracked and managed through TeamOhana and through our bidirectional sync with ATSs like Greenhouse and Ashby. And so it's really those connecting factors pulling in behind the scenes that makes this dashboard possible. So I think, uh, Aaron, essentially for a finance user, depending whether you are using spreadsheets or an FP&A tool, this is essentially the data then that you would either use an integration to load into your FP&A tool for forecasting, but it's also the view that you would use for board reporting. Do I have that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this view right here is essentially what sold me on Team Ohana way back in the day. This is a very similar view. This kind of what we'll call the headcount walk or a headcount waterfall is essentially what I was pulling together every single week. And I saw this and I immediately said, wow, this is doing everything that I'm doing and spending hours in a spreadsheet doing, and it does it automatically. So yeah, like that's what this is. Anytime I speak to anyone in finance, this is where I start as well, just because a lot of times in finance that we care about essentially the entire organization plus to be hired, so essentially where are you going to land at the end of the year, um, and it's very hard to get to that number. And the power of this is that, to your point, what you were mentioning, it stitches together the combination of butts and seat, or the existing people on board today, how many people we had at the beginning, and then all of the various movements, the ins and outs and the changes that get us to that ending number. Sometimes I call it the elusive forecast number because it's so hard to manage when you have all these various, death by a thousand paper cuts changes. And so this is a super powerful view that just gets you everything you need in one fell swoop.
Awesome. Thanks. And I know, so this is right here, we're looking at this at like a full company roll up, but you mentioned also being able to break it down by division or department. So I just wanted to come into our effective headcount report here too. That's going to give you more of that like division by division view. And then as well, we've been looking at it on an annual time frame, but I know you like to look at things quarterly and monthly as well. So we can also see the ending headcount month over month. So looking at this is our in our fiscal year, months that have already passed, and then looking at how the forecasted headcount is expected to grow by division to the remainder of the year, but on a monthly basis.
Yeah, 100%. I think the time frame is kind of the audience that it's useful for. Like, for example, you close the books every single month. So this is kind of that monthly view where you can see the ins and outs and kind of answer a few tactical questions, and maybe to your, senior manager or director of finance, say, hey, why are we over under? What were the changes? And then on a quarterly basis, you have a more deep review with the CFO. You say, here's the quarterly view, and that might make it into the board review. But then that fit the full year view is the super powerful one, because that's really telling the story of where we started and where we're going to end. And a lot of times that's the view that makes it into the board deck.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I'm just going to move through this next section quickly. I do want to touch on just like all the details that are captured on a single head count. Because again, it's all these little details and tracking changes that are happening on a day-to-day basis that makes the reporting that we look at. That it's very simple reporting, but it's what's happening behind the scenes is all the magic that makes it easy to show. So I just pulled up an example of a head count here. First thing is that we track the difference between a target start date and a budget start date, and same thing with target compensation versus budget compensation. So we're always able to compare what did we initially approve versus where are we currently at. And then not only that, we're also keeping a complete audit log of all of the changes that were requested and approved on a given headcount. And so I can see on any given headcount, like what was changed when and why and who changed it and who approved it. But what's more powerful than that is now we can roll that up into different reports to help you start to tell those stories of what changed and why. So rather than looking at it at obviously, if you're hiring hundreds of headcount a year, you can't read through the history of every single one, but you can do things like coming into our variance tracker here and understanding when we're thinking about like are we on track with our plan? So we can look at this in dollars or in heads to say, what did we initially set our budget to? Are we on track still, or is there a variance that we need to be aware of? And then we want to understand what's driving this variance. I can come down and see our new hire budget variance. That's going to highlight and start to tell that story highlighting where in our fiscal year we're overspending due to early hiring or we've paid higher than we had initially planned, or maybe we've up-leveled a role. And then also calling out any non-budgeted hires, so a headcount that were added to the plan midway through the year. And then similarly, where have we saved money because we pushed start dates out, which that can be a good thing, or that can indicate recruiter capacity and so on. So always follow-up questions to go from there. And then similarly, lower pay. So down leveling roles, moving to a lower cost location, or just coming in with an offer that was lower than the midpoint. Aaron, I know
Oh,
this view came out after you joined TeamOhana, but yeah, do you want to give your some of your initial thoughts, feedback on this view?
yeah, I mean, the first time I saw this view, I was jealous that I wasn't still a user. I mean, just because this type of variance is super powerful to have whenever you're explaining variances, and it's just not that easy to get to. Like the way that I would think about doing this if I didn't have this tool at my fingertips was I would have to pull down our hiring plan, I'd have to pull down our existing employees, I'd have to map everything together, figure out what that truly budgeted information was. Then I'd have to go and figure out what the budgeted fiscal cost was and then map it against their actual costs, salary, variable, maybe bonus, figure out when they actually started, figure out the fiscal impact, compare that together and figure out that's just the fiscal cost. Then I have to say, okay, was the salary higher or lower, and were they started earlier or later? And so there's just a lot of moving parts to get to that. It's just to answer a question of why are we over or under budget? And if it takes honestly 30 minutes to an hour at a minimum or even more, like it's just it's just hard to get to and it's hard to warrant that much time to do this. Whereas you come in here and you answer the question immediately. You can even filter, drill down by division and function here too. So I just say that I'm jealous that other users get to use this because it's super powerful and it answers questions in light speed.
Hmm. Yeah, your Excel skills must start to get rusty if you're not having to pull all this reporting together manually anymore.
A bit, yes.
Okay, last few pieces to cover in the Team Ohana platform here are our scenarios. So we could do a whole session on scenarios, best practices. I know, Aaron, you're a super user of scenarios, but specifically in the context of board ready reporting, I know we talked about some of those like follow-up questions you might want to be prepared for. So I think one example might be if you are over plan, let's say over your initial budget, or you've added more headcount than you had initially planned. Questions around how do we scale back hiring? How are we going to get back on track? Or your example earlier was, hey, we're noticing like there's an uptick in sales in this one area. We want to capitalize this. We want to add capacity to our sales engine. What's that going to do to our headcount forecast? Those are the types of questions that scenarios were built to answer. So, scenarios are essentially a live snapshot of your hiring plan, where you can come in and make changes and understand how those changes are going to impact your forecast, both in how number of heads as well as dollars, and what that compares to your initial budget. And so if I click in here, this is my aggressive growth acceleration. So I've added a ton of new headcount, 17 new headcount. And that's increased my forecasted cost by 1.35 million this fiscal year. Yeah, so Aaron, I think it sounded like this was a tool that you would use to just prepare some of those back pocket questions you might get asked. Hey, if you want to invest more in the sales team, here's how much it would cost to hire 20 new heads in sales or something like that. Are those the types of scenarios you were running?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the beauty of this is that it's a scenario, and so you can play around with whatever you need to do, whether it's adding new roles, removing roles, pulling in or pushing out start dates, decreasing compensation, for example. But the other piece to this is if the board says, hey, we want you to double down and go to market reporting or go to market investments, but we want to make this as cost and budget neutral as possible, the scenario allows you to do that. For example, this is the aggressive one, but we could create another one that says aggressive but budget neutral, where we keep all of these new roles we've added, but then we figure out where we want to deprioritize. Going back to the where we deprioritized R&D for go to market, you could then kick out maybe essentially all of the R&D roles by 30, 60, 90 days, and that'll ultimately reduce that fiscal impact without actually losing the addition of those go-to-market heads. So you can play around with all the various scenarios and figure out what that true, I guess, dollar impact is.
Yeah, that makes sense. That you're not just going to get unlimited money for your aggressive growth scenarios. All right, well, that is all the time we have. So I do just want to end on our little teaser for the Team Ohana computer that's coming next week. As Aaron and I were talking about what the board really wants to see in their headcount meetings, he was talking about how they really like to compare. He likes to compare what do we say we were going to do last quarter versus what are we saying now and what's changed? Because since that really helps tell the story of where investments are being shifted. And TeamOhana Computer helped me build this dashboard that answered that question exactly. And so this is all coming from data in the standard TeamOhana platform, but now just gave me the ability to like completely customize my view. It was just one simple prompt I gave it. I just said my board wants to be able to compare Q1 and Q2. Can you help me do that? And I got here right away. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about the Team Ohana computer, be sure to join us for our webinar next week. The link is in the resources tab on this Zoom. And otherwise, Aaron, thank you again so much for sharing your insights and your experiences with us. And thanks everyone for joining. We will see you next week.